We are in interesting times, and interesting times where people feel like the future has been denied them. And in many ways, it has. Your elites clearly don't have a vision for the future. They don't even trust their own children. They cannot come up with a role of succession and increasingly rely on big men, on old men, men who stand as proxies for things. Bonaparte not astride a horse conquering Europe, but doddering on a teleprompter. We've seen a decline of collective leadership across the world. It was one of Mike Davis's last fears and why he died pessimistic about the future. You cannot stand outside history. You are not special. Do not flatter yourself. Neither am I. And there is a central question of both development and ideology fundamentally left unaddressed. Otherwise, you would not be trying to fix the complexity of your world by depending on doddering leadership or coalitions of people who make a hash out of everything for a myth. No one, even the most diehard atheists, lives in a world without myths. Absolutely true. But when your leaders believe them and your ideologues collapse them, they start having a pernicious function. This needs to be dealt with, and this needs to be addressed. And perhaps some reading of Marx's Brumaire will help us here. Long quote from the Brumaire. Chapter 7. Just as the Bourbons were the dynasty of the big landed property and the Orleans were the dynasty of money, the Bonapartes were the dynasty of the peasants. The peasants, that is, the French masses. The chosen of the peasantry is not the Bonaparte who submitted to the bourgeois parliament, but the Bonaparte who dismissed the bourgeois parliament. For 3 years, Towns had succeeded in falsifying the meaning of December 10th elections and in cheating the peasants out of the restoration of the empire. The election of December 10th, 1848, has been consummated only in the coup d'etat of December 2nd, 1851. The small landholding peasants form an enormous mass whose members live in similar conditions but without entering into manifold relations with each other. Their mode of production isolates them from one another instead of bringing them into mutual intercourse. The isolation is furthered by France's poor means of communication and the poverty of the peasants. Their field of production, the small holding, permits no division of labor in its cultivation of land, no application of science, therefore no multifariousness of development, no diversity of talent, no wealth of social relationships. Each individual peasant is almost self-evident, directly produces most of its consumer needs, and thus acquires the means of life through the exchange with nature than in intercourse with society. A small holding, the peasant and his family. Besides it, another small holding, another, and another family. A few scores of these constitute a village, a few scores of a village constitute a department, and thus the great mass of the French nation is formed by the simple addition of homogeneous magnitudes, such as potatoes in a sack form a sack of potatoes. Insofar as millions of families live under the conditions of existence that separate their mode of life, their interest, and their culture from those of the other classes and put them in hostile opposition to the latter, they form a class. Insofar as they are merely local interconnections among these small peasant, their identities, interest forms no community, no national bond, no political organization among them. They do not constitute a class. This is Varn talking. This is the class in itself and class for itself's distinction. They are therefore incapable of asserting their class interest in their own name. whether through parliament or convention. If they cannot represent themselves, they must be represented. I'm going to repeat that. They cannot represent themselves, they must be represented. Their representative must at the same time appear as their master, as an authority over them, an unlimited government power which protects them from the other classes and sends the rain and sunshine from above. The political influence of the small holding peasants, therefore, finds its final expression in the executive power which subordinates society to itself. Historical tradition gave rise to the French peasants' belief in the miracle that a man named Napoleon would bring all the glory back to them. And there turned up an individual who claims to be that man because he bears the name Napoleon, and the consequence of the Code Napoleon, which decrees inquiry into paternity is forbidden. After a 20-year vagabondage and a series of grotesque adventures, the legend is consummated, and the man becomes emperor of the French. The fixed idea of the nephew was realized because it coincided with the fixed idea of the numerous classes of the French people. But it may be objected. What about the present uprising in the half of France? The waves of the army on the peasants, the mass incarceration and transportation of the peasants. Since Louis XIV, France has experienced no similar persecution of peasants on the account of demagogic agitation. But let us not misunderstand. The Bonaparte dynasty represents not the revolutionary, but the conservative peasant. This is why I'm talking, acknowledging there is such a thing as a revolutionary peasant, which a lot of people miss. Back to text. But the peasant who strikes out beyond the conditions of its social existence, the small holding, but whether one who wants to consolidate his holding, not the country folk whose alliance with the towns wants to overthrow the old order through their own energies, but those who, in solid seclusion from this old order, want to see themselves and their small holdings saved from and favored by the ghost of empire. It is not the enlightenment, but the superstition of the peasant, not his judgment, but his prejudice, not his future, but his past, not his modern Civines, but his modern Vendée. 3 years, Stern ruled the parliamentary republic, freed a part of the French peasantry from the Napoleonic illusion and revolutionized them, even though superficially. But the bourgeois violently repulsed them as often as they set them in motion. Under parliamentary republic, the modern and traditional conscience of the French peasant contended for mastery. The process took the form of an incessant struggle between the schoolmaster and the priest. The bourgeoisie struck down the schoolmasters, the peasant for the first time in the effort to behave independently vis-a-vis the government. This was shown in the continual conflict between the mayors and the prefects. The bourgeoisie deposed those mayors, and finally, during the period of parliamentary republic, the peasants of different localities arose for their own offspring, the army. The bourgeoisie punished the peasants with sieges and executions, and the same bourgeoisie now cries against the stupidity of the masses, the vile multitude that betrayed it to Bonaparte. The bourgeoisie itself violently strengthened the imperialism of the peasant class, has preserved the conditions from the birthplaces of the species of the peasant religion. The bourgeoisie, in truth, is bound to fear the stupidity of the masses so long as they remain conservative, and the insight of the masses as soon as they become revolutionary. That's a long chunk of the end of the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. We don't have peasants today. But as I pointed out, the irony of the centralization of productive power has diffused the workforce through both automation and the need for services. The diffusion of the workforce has broken us up, added by the further alienation of technology, which makes the 80s shopping mall looks like a paradigm of sociality in comparison. Now, technological mediation need not have gone this way. There is nothing about technological mediation that had to be so alienating. And in fact, the internet, while always to some degree commodified, when it became super commodified under the conditions of QE, where people could leverage the cost of debt versus the payout to venture capital, you saw massive monopolies cartel off more and more of the internet. And then in response to the fear of parts of the petite bourgeoisie and the Sunbelt declining bourgeois classes and the flyover parts of the United States, for those of you who think I'm being sarcastic here, I am, but not in the way you think. I've always lived in flyover country. No, you cannot stand outside this history. As you become more and more alienated, you reach out for new identities to connect you to someone, even if those identities are parasocial illusions. The need for mediation is strong. And so things that look like they will answer your questions and hold together a seemingly impossible way of life will be offered to you, but they will make you dependent. From the populist demagogue to the state technocrat, their offer is the same. And you are not even a sack of potatoes, but more like Pringles stacked in a can. And in this, there's all kinds of opportunism and delusion that will come upon you. The problem with returning to the old delimited notions of a left that has very clear objectives, very horizontal organization, where the most radical can appoint themselves leaders, speak for the group dishonestly, and people can form coalitions and try to correct the matter. It's just a matter of repetition. The essential question is not answered. The essential question is, why are you so isolated? And what has that done to your understanding of your greater place in society? People will reach for simple answers. They will reach for the mythic. They will reach for some image of a man with a mustache, regardless of the shape of that mustache. We've seen this multiple times, both on the left and the right, and we're seeing the two converge now, with the people who would oppose it also converging with liberals and their own administrative state. And after all, in the United States, the administrative state is one step away from just being the military. Do not give in to simple opportunism. Do not soften your principles because you don't even understand what they are. Do not confuse yourself about your own likelihood of success. A lot of people today just want to side with winners, even if they have to ignore the fact that the people that they're siding with didn't ultimately win. If they had won, you would not be here where you are, standing by yourself. But since you cannot resolve the problem, we play in the clothing of the past. We LARP our way into the future, or in the case of younger people, we massively online role-playing game our way to the future. But here we are, and here you are. And what are you going to do about it? I've been accused of being nihilist, although I find this funny because my no is based off the principles of something I do actually believe. I hope you all are very clear on what you actually believe. You're going to need it. But your politics as identities, on one hand, mass politics as it existed in the early 20th century was an indication of something gone wrong. Horribly wrong. On the other hand, the politics of today may not even be properly called politics. It is a substitute for the mediation needed, normally found in community bonds. There is no imminent community. There's always a mediation there. And yet, that tension rings throughout you all. Because no one wants to be a sack of potatoes. We might not be peasants anymore, but we are no longer socialized by our labor, except in very limited ways. It's time to realize what that means. And it's time to act accordingly. Good luck. Like and subscribe, hit the bell. Find me on the Patreon if you want more like this. Keep your peace, protect it, and be ready.